You're listening to Death of the Reader, Flex and Herds, and Brad Friedman here to discuss Yukito Ayatsuji's The Millhouse Murders, our final week, delving all the way into the deep dark secrets and more of this classic locked room murder mystery. Brad from oursweetmystery.com. I see a scowl, a frustrated guise on your face. Tell me, sir, at the end of The Millhouse Murders, were you satisfied?
With this book? No.
Oh, no.
Whoa. Not even a mostly, just a no. Damn.
I wish I knew more about the whole subgenre of honkaku, shin honkaku, and the relationship that modern authors have with their predecessors. So here we are, slowly evolving with our knowledge of the adventures of Kindaichi and some of the great classic honkaku mysteries. And we assume that the new writers are honoring the traditions. They're certainly trying to work within the conventions of the classic genre rather than playing around with that too much. You can tell at the end of this that there is a nod to John Dixon Carr with a whiff of the supernatural at the very end. But this one just didn't satisfy the way that Decagon House Murders did. And I like to think that Ho-Ling Wong is going, that's fine, Brad, because I've got the third one all ready to go. And you are going to get to read all 12 of them or however many there are and pick your favorites among them. And I won't always love all of them. I did not like The Murder on the Links nearly as much as I like The Mysterious Affair at Styles. So that happens. But I'm a big fan of the Inugami Curse. And the Inugami Curse also has a masked figure and uses that masked figure very cleverly. You know when there's a masked figure that you're going to get issues of identity. And it's all done very well. Not only that, but the elements of horror in Inugami are fabulous. Here, Herds and I didn't have to even try.
Brad, I really enjoyed listening to you puzzle things out based on the language of the book and the actual character clues and what's going up with everybody. But as I've said since the beginning, this book is a simple math problem. Someone has to be behind the mask who isn't who we think they are, and the person who's disappeared isn't the person we think they are. There are only like two solutions, like two people that could be each of those mysteries, which is a shame. I also want to say I feel a bit bad for Yurie in terms of her part in the story. A lot of the things that I thought were Shimada being clever were just Yurie kind of waffling about. Apparently, I don't know what happened. Like, all the ladies in this book get kind of shafted by the plot. Most of them die to motivate other characters.
Yukito Ayatsuji in these first two books in the Mansion Murder series has just not written women well.
They kind of use more as clues and motivations.
I would ask if you've ever talked to some of the wonderful Japanese guests you've had and ask them about the role of women in these books, because there are very few women in some of these books. Death Among the Undead has some women in it, and actually it has a very interesting woman in it who becomes one of the detectives, and she's probably the most interesting woman I've seen yet.
I just want to use an example here because it became very obvious that Yukito Ayatsuji has no interest in using women as characters. When Midamura and the second housekeeper, I never remember her name, the new housekeeper dies. Midamura dies because he is making advances on a woman and he's like part of the plot and he's doing stuff and he motivates the murder. The new housekeeper dies in order to illustrate how a man can sprint through a house. It's just to show that there are two deaths in different parts of the house.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things with Yurie, right, is that her character motivation is that she's been trapped here. She's been mistreated by men. And the story kind of does nothing to actually resolve that.
She doesn't take back her own agency.
No.
She kind of meekly writes letters and unlocks doors like a ghost and then doesn't do anything at the end. Like, what is the point of all of that?
She's just not that kind of a character. She doesn't have any agency. She is a victim. And she stays a victim to the very end. And we don't really get to know too much about that because we're supposedly kept in the dark about the identity of the man and the fact that one man basically traded with another her victimhood. I was so hoping that the whole use of pronouns might be a more clever trick, particularly when the first week, the three of us noticed that every single person seemed to have a missing or dead relative or friend or whatever. And it could have been any kind of thing, They could have used the whole Masaki thing as a red herring. But it's just not that kind of a book. It's not that rich or that clever.
I guess, how did you receive the breakdown, though? Because weirdly, I felt that despite how obvious the crime was, there was actually a good sense of momentum through the explanation of things.
Shimada was pretty funny. We got that horror bit where Muskie is hearing noises in the walls and thinking about all the unlocking of doors that's happening. And he hears Shimada on the other side of like the secret passage, and he thinks, "Oh, it's the missing man." And then Shimada's like, "Oh, thank goodness Hirie let me out of that horrible secret closet. I would have been stuck there. I would have had to have gone back the other way." Like, Shimada is just making light of the whole situation, which I feel like, I know we're trying to talk about a positive here, but also making light of the situation feels like the only thing that would work at that point in the book.
Well, I think the thing that they've characterized well is that Shimada isn't actually really capable of dealing with this. Like, in the Decagon House murders, he wasn't actually at the scene of the crime. He only saw the aftermath and solved it by context. Like, he wasn't on the island. And in this book, he sees a body for the first time, and he's like, "Well, that's too much for me. I'm going to go deal with this the only way I know how."
I find him totally charming, and I think, like Decagon, this is a very charming read. Given how simple the crime turns out to be in the end, the use of the alternating timelines is a very clever idea, and it also adds a sort of momentum, and he very cleverly parallels situations between past and present. And Shimada adds a whole different energy to the present that differentiates the two periods. He's a wonderful detective. He's a little bit of a Kindaichi eccentric.
Well, I mean, yeah, he's even got runs his hand through his hair when he's noticing a clue thing.
Yes, he just doesn't dress in that ridiculous Jack Pumpkinhead thing, the cloak and the hat and the things with it. But I like him. I really do.
For me, it definitely depends on what else you've read, because, like, multiple timeline stuff like this is a real Australian modern classic. I did a little piece on Chris Hammer's The Tilt at the end of last year, talking about how Australian multiple timeline crime novels have like really come into their own over the past few years. So that sort of play is very familiar. And then, the masked character murders, like, depending on how many of those you've read, you've seen as many solutions as you can for the sort of mathematics that Herds was talking about earlier, right?
Yeah, same with Locked Rooms.
Past events affecting the present is a major trope in murder mystery. Doing it this way, though, showing us, revealing what happened in both timelines at the same time, is a more unusual process, and probably the best part of the Millhouse murder.
As many issues as I might have with the puzzle of the Millhouse murders, I thought that the actual just structural execution of the thing was really tight.
But not that difficult. Like the three false suspects, they don't really develop or do anything in the past. They're just there. They really do their stuff in the present. Mitamura becomes a real villain in the present and becomes a murder victim in the present.
But I also think that there's a bit of validity to that, because we can't really know what those characters were like in the past. Like, it's still all from Masaki's perspective, and he'd only just met these guys. Like, that was the first day he'd met them back then. Like, I think there's actually, from a reader's perspective, I definitely agree with you. They feel a bit more pale in the past, but I think thematically that actually kind of works for me.
But why couldn't he just write a letter to the three of them and say, after this horrific murder where my dearest friend was burned alive in an incinerator, I cannot in good conscience invite you people back to this house.
Well, because they would have showed up anyway. The book says that, Brad. Come on.
They're looking for the prophet painting.
Oh,
the
yes.
secret prophet painting.
Can we talk for a minute about that one?
I think we should save that for the next section, my friends.
I think that's the next section.
Yes, where we roast you over the coals for the final 10 minutes.
Yes. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex, Herds, and Brad Friedman from Our Sweet Mystery here talking about Yukito Ayatsuji's The Millhouse Murders all the way to the end. We'll be back with more of that in just a second. Stick around. You're listening to 2SER 107.3. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are once again blessed to be joined by Irene Diakanastasis, talking about a wonderful new release crime novel. This week, it is Black Lies by Mercedes Mercier, following a criminal psychologist, Dr. Laura Fleming, who you might know from her previous novel, White Noise. She's been paired up with convicted murderer Tomas Kovac, who has refused to disclose where he hid the body of his victim, and this tense thriller follows their journey together. I'll pass you over to Irene right now. Take it away.
Today, I'm joined by the lovely Mercedes Mercier, who is here to talk about her new novel, Black Lies, out now. Welcome, Mercedes, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, to begin, how would you describe Black Lies?
Oh, good question. So it's a crime thriller, I'd say, and it is set in a fictional prison in New South Wales, and it follows a criminal psychologist whose name is Dr. Laura Fleming. And at the prison, there's this notorious inmate who's in for murdering, pretty brutal murder, and he never revealed where he left the body of his victim. So this inmate gets diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer. He's only got a few weeks left to live. And so the authorities bring on Laura to sort of sit with him and try and convince him to reveal where he left the body of his victim, to give, the victim's family some closure before it's too late and he passes. But as Laura starts to sit in these sessions with him and talk to him and get to know him a little bit, she starts to realise that something doesn't feel quite right. So she follows her intuition, and she starts to go down these rabbit holes. But as she's doing so, she realises that there's people, connected that will do anything to keep the past hidden.
Now, Black Lies is your second novel following criminal psychologist Laura Fleming. For those who haven't read White Noise, which is your debut novel, can you tell us a bit more about Laura Fleming and how has her character changed from the previous novel?
So Black Lies is set about 18 months after the events of White Noise. So Black Lies, my second book, they're both standalone books, so you don't have to have read either of them to understand and read either of them, if that makes sense. So you don't have to have read White Noise to understand and read Black Lies, because it's just really sort of touched on quite briefly. So it starts about 18 months after the events of White Noise, and Laura's in a better place. The events of White Noise were pretty horrific, pretty full on, but she's been working, to get through that and to sort of get over that for the last 18 months. And we see her in Black Lies in a bit of a better position, sort of mentally and physically and mentally.
Now, as you mentioned before, within Black Lies, Laura, I feel like, at least to me, she seems like she's still in quite an intense position, so to speak. Not only is her job quite demanding as a criminal psychologist, but she's been dealt with a pressure-filled task, in particular with regard to Tomas Kovac. Now, how would you say Laura manages her newfound situation? Were there certain coping mechanisms or mentalities she had to employ for this particular job?
Well, I think I really like Laura. She's a really strong, gutsy character who she sort of does everything she can to achieve her goals. Some of the ways she goes about it aren't exactly protocol and, aren't quite following the rules, but she just wants to go into the prison every day to do her best, to try her hardest and have the best outcomes for the people she works with. She still obviously carries a bit of trauma from everything that happened in White Noise, but also everything that happened in her past. And I think that flavours a lot of the decisions she makes and the way she acts. She sees a lot of her daughter in the victim And I think that's a bit of a holdover from the trauma that her and her daughter went through in White Noise. So I think it does flavour all of her decisions and her reactions and everything that happens in Black Lives, because it's impossible to separate yourself from that. But she is trying to, but it's one thing being educated in psychology and understanding it when it happens to other people, but when it shows up in your own life, she's finding it hard to sort of recognise it and separate herself from it.
Moving from the book to more of your experiences, to my knowledge, you have worked in the criminal justice system, in particular the Communications for Corrections in South Australia. Now, how did your unique insight into the prison system influence this particular story? And were there any specific experiences or inspirations that you put into this story?
The seed of the idea first started when I wrote White Noise, and I was chatting to one of my friends who's a psychologist that I work with, and she had to assess this inmate and his suitability for early release to parole. It's just such a huge, important responsibility to sit on one person's shoulders, and so that was where the idea first started of that I really wanted to write from a criminal psychologist's point of view, and then I think the germ of the idea for Black Lies came a few years ago. I was working near a team who was helping to bring the No Body, No Parole legislation through Parliament in South Australia.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that legislation is, it's obviously pretty much exactly as it sounds. If an offender doesn't release the whereabouts of their victim's body, then they're not eligible for parole. And so I just thought that's just such an interesting, thing to pass. And so my brain just started ticking away, and I thought, there's a prisoner who essentially is in there on a life sentence. They don't have that carrot of parole sort of dangling over their head, I guess. Yeah. So I wanted to sort of explore, that idea that they've really got nothing to lose.
Given your real life experiences, did you ever find a struggle to balance this fictionalized story with the reality?
I had to be very careful and make sure that no situation, character or, setting was based on, any one thing that I'd experienced in real life. So I couldn't base a character on an inmate that I know, for example. That's not something that I'm able to do. So I had to be very careful to, if there was something that I picked and chose from life experience, that I mixed it together with sort of my own imagination and sort of plucked things from various areas that I guess that I know. Even, the prison that it's set at, Westmead Prison, is a fictional prison set in New South Wales, so different state, and that was sort of an amalgamation of a number of prisons that I've seen and experienced around Australia, but also my own imagination. So it is a fictionalized story, I guess, in the way that a police procedural is fictionalized, because no one really wants to read a book about a police officer that's sitting there doing paperwork 70% of the time, which is a huge part of a police officer job.
To conclude this interview, thank you so much, Mercedes, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to Irene Diakanastasis there, speaking with Mercedes Mercier about her latest novel, Black Lies. Thank you to Harper Collins for providing copies of the book to 2SER, and we will have links up on the podcast if you want to find out more about that. The Millhouse Murders continues in just a second. You're tuned in to 2SER 107.3. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour with our special, treasured, friendly guest, Brad Friedman from Our Sweet Mystery, who is, briefly before we discuss the final stretch of this novel, The Millhouse Murders by Yukito Ayatsuji, going to plug his website and the wonderful work he does over there.
My website is sweetmystery.com. I write about classic mystery both on the page and in film and on stage. I write a lot about Agatha Christie, and I'm very excited to announce that I am going to be, at least virtually, a part of the Agatha Christie Festival this fall. I've made a film about my experiences directing Agatha Christie, and that is going to be shown at the festival and put online on their online virtual presence. So
I am genuinely really, really excited for that. Those of you who haven't read Brad's website, you really should dive into just the wonderful storytelling about storytelling he does and unpacking both the way that works are put together, but what they mean on a personal level, both directly to Brad and to like the audience in general. It is gorgeous.
Look, I'm excited to see the film. I haven't seen your cinematography as far as I know, but I'm excited to see a film about storytelling. I think that'll be fun.
All right, so now that I've butted you up, Brad, can you go easy on me when it comes to this painting?
No, get him.
I have a question for Herds.
Oh,
Because I don't listen to you if you guys are talking about a book I haven't read, because it's all about spoilers, and I will only listen if I'm reading along, right? But Herds, does Flex often ask you questions that are impossible to answer? And then dangle points before you, saying, I really can't give you all the points if you can't tell me, say, the content of a painting that is not revealed until the final paragraph, with no clues or any kind of precedence as to the kind of work he might have painted. And yet our points are dependent upon our giving him that impossible answer.
I can see Flex trying to jump in already and defend himself. Sometimes we'll dangle theoretical or extra points, but not usually the core 3 or however many points we've got as the core points this year.
I haven't even told you how many points you're getting this week, and you're already having a go at me about how many points you're getting.
Say you do 3 or 4 points as a rule.
Uh-huh.
For you to say, gentlemen, I have a proposition. I'm going to dangle a 5th point in front of you to the person who can most correctly describe the painting that was painted.
Is that not what I did, Brad Friedman from oursweetmystery.com?
I don't know that it is, but yeah, look.
Here's the thing, is if I phrase the question that way, then it might imply to the intelligent reader, like I think the both of you are, that perhaps it's not actually quite feasible to describe the painting based on the text here. It presents it as an actual challenge so that if there is evidence that I haven't spotted, you can clown on me.
I do enjoy clowning on you. The problem is that the painting is a smorgasbord of things. It is a face, legs, and a hand.
And a mansion.
With a castle behind it. None of that is connected to anything.
It's called the Phantom Cluster. It's a cluster of things.
A cluster?
It is a cluster of objects, all of which somehow seem to predict the future. The painting reveals the potential for a sort of supernatural, a precognitive aspect to the painter's work. And again, that's an homage to Carr. And he'd like to dangle that before us. And so I know how much the Honkaku and Shin Honkaku writers revere these people. That's what draws me to this subgenre to begin with, because so many modern American and British and Australian publishers and writers could care less about them. They make fun of Christie and Carr and Queen and all those people. So I liked the painting. But what I found missing, and again, it's only the second book in the series, is more advancement of the concept of the relationship between Shimada and the architect. There's some, but there's not enough. Frankly, what does the architect do? He creates an elevator to a secret room that is essentially a tomb. What is his purpose in creating these funny houses? You want these super mastermind, whether he's a criminal or a monster or a mage or whatever he is, you want more information dangled before you about this overarching thread.
Seiji Nakamura so far in this series feels like he is just the embodiment of Knox's rule about secret passages. It feels a little cheap. Can
I tell you, obviously I figured out where the secret passage was because in hindsight, it was the only part of the house that was like described as in color. And that's why it stood out to me, the red brick fireplace. Shimada tries to say that the Seijis must be tied to the nature of the house. And so, of course, what do you tie to 3 mill wheels that spin around and around? A vertical elevator with a trap top to it. Like, to me, that's not a very exciting Seijiism. Something that moves in circles would have made more sense, right?
I thought of turning as well, and I think turning would have made more sense. Just like a room turning. You could have used an Ellery Queen clue. I won't say what it's from, but everyone who knows Queen will know what I'm talking about. But say that the 2 upper rooms, the room that Uriel slept in, and then the 2 bedrooms at the top, revolved in some way.
This is a big heckin' mansion with a huge courtyard with nothing in it. Why would Seiji create such a large space? And that space goes unused.
So it's used eventually as a gallery for his paintings, but he was not aware when the house was built that Masaki was going to grab every painting out of existence and put it in the house. So he wouldn't have known that the whole thing would be used as an art gallery. There's something missing.
Yeah, that's okay though. I hope that the future Impossible Houses will rectify this issue and give us something, as you say, that furthers the relationship between mad architect and mad detective. That's the dream anyway.
There's a dollhouse in there, and I can't wait to see what that is.
I'm ready for it. I'm ready.
I suppose there is only one thing left to decide here, and that is your points.
What are you feeling, Flex? What's the vibe here? Because we got
I think
points.
As you were saying earlier, it was unreasonable of me to put the painting in your regular bundle of points. And to be honest, I never really intended to, so much as just to dangle the carrot in front of you that perhaps you would be able to find a clue for the painting that I did not. So you will walk away with the full 3 points. But the question remains, who's getting them? Is it the away team?
So
is it Herds?
Here's the thing.
Are we splitting them up?
Brad and I...
There are no half points.
Shush your mouth. Brad and I had a gentleman's agreement that if we walked away with 2 points, then I would take all of them. But if we walked away with 3 points, then I would award the away team 2 of the 3 points, and I will take the third graciously. I think, Brad, you've done an excellent job at annihilating this mystery and Yukito Ayatsuji's pride as a mystery writer. So, you can see the away team can have 2 points. It was an excellent time solving this mystery with you.
Well, I know I'm in illustrious company, and I salute the other members of the away team. I hope I've done them proud.
I hope so too. I hope they listen on from beyond the grave, I assume.
In the end, I really enjoyed this book, despite how straightforward it is. It was a very comfy mystery read. I felt like just familiar mystery fiction that was well constructed, well put together, but didn't challenge me in the same way as like the Decagon House murders did. And I was totally okay with that.
If it's fun to read, if it's enjoyable, it doesn't need to completely mystify me. I'm fine with that too.
4 out of 10. No.
Well, Herds, I hope that your next book can challenge us more.
I hope so. We will be reading, I believe, a Taiwanese murder mystery. We're going to be reading Death in the House of Rain by Xu Yan Lin. And we are going to be reading just chapter 1. It's a long chapter. It is a wild time. Brad is running around.
This
there it
is a great house. I won't say anything more because I know that Herds wants all the points.
There's points on this. I do want.
But I will say that this is one. There are weaknesses in this one, but this is one where the house matters a bunch, and I love this house.
I'm excited. We should have you back just to talk about the house at the end. That would be fun. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to challenging with this one. It's a very spooky story. There's ghostly footprints and spooky houses, and it's a good time. It's a good time.
Pretty gruesome murders too.
There may be dismemberment involved. It's pretty bloody. Look forward to solving that one, Flex.
Brad, thank you so much for joining us for the Millhouse Murders. This episode was a long time waiting in the wings as we suffered the drawn-out procedures of international publishing, but I'm glad we finally got together to discuss this.
Me too. I had a blast. Thank you guys, as always. I love coming here.
That was good.
We have been discussing The Millhouse Murders by Yukito Ayatsuji, the second novel in the Mansion Murder series, translated by the incredible Ho-Ling Wong, just put out by Pushkin Vertigo in the English-speaking world. We'll be back next week on the show with Death in the House of Rain. This is your Murder Mystery World Tour here on 2SER 107.3, and we'll see you then.